welcome back to Middle-earth. It's good to have you here again. If you've been listening for a while, you already know this is our quiet corner of Arda, a place where the fires burn low, the world slows down, and the stories feel familiar. Tonight, we'll wander through ancient forests, forgotten kingdoms, and the long shadows of the Second and Third Age. No rush, no noise, just the lore of the Lord of the Rings, told gently, like it was always meant to be heard. So, settle in. Let your mind drift to the Shire, to Rivendell, to the white towers of Minas Tirith. And together, let's return to Middle-earth. Hello friends, night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now, it is time to rest. As always, I will tell you a kind legend that once took place in our beloved Middle-earth. So settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin. In this quiet hour when the noise of the waking world has grown distant and the last tasks of the day have slipped from your hands, your thoughts may still be crowded with many small burdens, with cares that pressed upon you like an unseen host. Let them go for a while. There is no enemy here and no battle that must be fought before sleep. There is only the soft turning of time toward darkness and dream, and the calm light of an old tale told by lamplight at the edge of slumber. I will tell you a kind legend of a dark lord who saw much, and of a quiet king he never truly saw at all. Sauron of Mordor, whose eye searched the plains and mountains of Middle-earth, believed that nothing of great power could move without his notice, that every will must bend in the end to fear, to pride, or to the hunger for dominion. Yet far from the fires of Orodruin, another will walked in shadow and in patience, hidden beneath a weather-stained cloak, bearing a name that had not yet been spoken aloud in the courts of men. As your breathing slows and the room around you grows softer and more remote, imagine that you are passing from the bright fields of your own day into a quieter realm of memory and myth, where the red glare of Mordor burns far away upon the horizon and cannot touch you. Its darkness is only a story's darkness. Its fire is only a remembered fire. Here in this safe distance we may look upon the Black Land and upon those who opposed it, without fear, without haste, and without the weariness of real peril. For the heart of this tale is simple, though its paths are many. Sauron, master of domination and terror, could not fathom the heart of Aragorn, who walked long years as a ranger and a wanderer, who served in secret in the wars of Gondor and Rohan, who bore the lineage of Elendil and the long memory of Númenor, and yet chose humility, mercy, and hidden strength over the swift grasping of power. How could such a man refuse the ring itself? How could a mortal stand beneath the eye and remain unclaimed? Yet not all courage had perished. In the quiet choices of one man, in his patience, in his strange refusal to be ruled by fear or greed, lay a hope that Sauron never counted. Our journey through this legend will be unhurried and safe, moving from the soft hills of the Shire to the Black Land and back again. And there is no need for you to remember every name or every deed. Simply rest and drift with the rhythm of the words, as we follow the long, hidden road of the man whom Mordor misjudged, and ask together how a single unseen heart could bring about the fall of a dark lord who believed he saw all. Breath, stillness, and the first glimpse of the eye. So settle in comfortably and let the body grow still, as if the long road of the day had ended at last beside a quiet shore. Let the tongue rest from speech, the jaw loosen, and the shoulders sink away from the neck, as though some unseen burden of labor and care slid gently to the earth. And now it is time to rest. Allow the breath to slow. First a soft inhale and then an easy release, and then again a little deeper, like waves that creep and fall upon a starlit strand, leaving only faint lines upon the sand to show that they have ever been. With each breath, the noise of the waking world draws further away, until it seems only a rumor beyond the hills. If it is comfortable, gently close your eyes or let your gaze grow soft and unfocused, as though you looked through a thin mist rather than at any hard and near thing. There is nothing you must do now, no battle you must fight, no host of tasks pressing at the gate. There is only the slow, steady rise and fall of the breath, and the sound of a voice that will keep the watch while you drift. Hello, friends. I will tell you a kind legend, and in this telling we will go together, step by unhurried step, into the long ages of Middle-earth. When the lids grow heavy, we may still walk, for the mind has roads of its own, and the spirit remembers paths that the feet have never trod. So now we turn, not as one guiding another, but as companions upon the same dim track, and let our journey begin. In the quiet of this room, we may spread before us the wide lands of the West, as if they were a great, half-forgotten map unrolled upon an old oaken table. There are the white towers and river vales of Gondor, gleaming faintly like silver in the dusk. There are the broken north kingdoms of Arnor, their watchfires long since cold. And far away, like a dark stain at the edge of sight, lies Mordor, where the mountains rise like a wall against all gentle things. Above this map, the sky of the mind grows deep and star-sown. In that inner firmament there appears, very small and very far, an eye of fire. It does not blaze here as it did above the black land, a terror upon the plain, but flickers instead like a distant, ill-omened star, a point of malice that cannot cross the gulf to touch you. It is only an image, no more able to pierce these walls than a dream is able to break stone. We may look upon it together without fear, for in this stillness the eye of Sauron is a sign to be studied, not a doom to be suffered. It turns ever searching, filled with hunger and with wrath, seeking the ring, seeking the strong wills of men and elves that might claim it, seeking always to master and to bend. Yet even as it swept the world beneath its gaze, it failed to understand one man who walked under the same cold stars that we now imagine. How can a sight that reaches from Mordor to Minas Tirith falter at a single mortal heart? How can a mind that weighed the pride of Númenórean kings misjudge the heir of Elendil, who chose mercy where others chose power, and hope where others saw only death? In the quiet that surrounds us, we may begin to ask these things, and in the asking, to see more clearly the nature of power, and of the choices that lie hidden in the dark, like seeds awaiting the spring. A world under watch, Sauron's gaze across Middle-earth. In those late days of the Third Age, when the long watch of the West seemed thin and failing, Middle-earth lay beneath a shadow that few could name and yet many could feel. The air itself seemed to remember older wars. And in that breathless waiting, the eye in Barad-dûr turned slowly, tirelessly from horizon to horizon, searching for the shape of its own doom and seeing instead only realms to break and wills to bend. Far to the east, beyond the black teeth of Efelduath, the ash-dark plains of Gorgoroth stretched away beneath a sky stained red. Above them, Orodruin glared, its fire rising and falling, a sullen breathing of the mountain, and the forges of Mordor thundered like distant storm. Night or day, there was a dull roar, the clanging of iron, the tramp of a countless host in training for battle and death, and all of it was known to Sauron as a king knows the beating of his own heart. Westward, the white walls of Minas Tirith stood like a memory of a purer time, tier upon tier above the Anduin, yet even there the shadow was felt. In the taverns and watch-houses of Gondor, men spoke in low voices, and rumours moved like smoke, of black sails upon the sea, of captains who did not return, of a nameless fear that pressed upon their sleep. "The enemy is upon us," some whispered, though they dared not say his name, and they felt upon their necks the unseen weight of a gaze that never tired. Northward, under ancient pines and along forgotten paths, the rangers walked in silence. Their cloaks were weather-stained, their boots worn thin by long roads, and they moved like shadows between the shadows, guarding lands that scarcely knew their peril. Above them, the stars still burned clear, and in hidden hollows a small fire might glow for a little time, yet even there the thought of Mordor crept, carried by wandering tales and the unrest of beasts that scented a coming war. Beyond all this, in the quiet shire, the grass grew soft and deep, and smoke from simple hearths rose straight into a gentler sky. There Sauron's eye seldom turned, for he counted such small folk and their green hills beneath his notice, yet his servant still moved at the edges, and the great web of his watchfulness drew ever tighter across the world. For Sauron's seeing was not mere sight. It was a mind of fire and iron, forever reaching outward, seeking strength that it might corrupt, ambition that it might inflame, fear that it might command. Through armies and spies, through the Nazgul that rode in darkness, through Palantiri, once proud and now enslaved to his will, he weighed the hearts of elves and men, and judged them by his own desire for mastery. Yet not all courage had perished, for in that vast design, one thread ran strangely free, moving where it willed along the wild ways of the north. A tall wanderer in a grey cloak, known to some as Strider, whose true name and hidden lineage the Dark Lord marked only as a distant threat, and never as the quiet, patient hope that would one day stand before the Black Gate. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin to follow that solitary figure, whom even the eye upon its dark tower did not truly understand. The shape of a dark mind, Sauron's worldview and blind spots. In the far-off beginning of his long decline, before the towers of Barad-dûr had risen, and before the ring had yet been forged, Sauron was not a lord of darkness, but a servant of order. He had served Auli the smith, and under that mighty hand he learned the beauty of craft, the shaping of substance, the mastery of form. Even then he loved design and arrangement, and in his heart there stirred a desire that all things should be set in their appointed places, obedient to a single, guiding mind. When the enemy of the world, Morgoth Bauglir, raised his black standard in the first great battle against the music of Ilúvatar, Sauron turned to him, for in Morgoth he saw a will that sought not harmony, but absolute dominion. Under that dark master his thoughts were disciplined and hardened. There he learned that fear could be a tool, that pain could be a chain, that the quickest road to order was the bending of every lesser spirit beneath one unanswerable command. And as the hosts of Morgoth went forth, and death and fire swept over Beleriand, Sauron watched and learned until mercy grew thin within him, and control became his only comfort. Hello, friends. As you settle in comfortably and gently close your eyes, it is time to rest and to look, for a little while, into the shape of that dark mind. For when the First Age ended and Morgoth was cast into the outer darkness, Sauron did not repent. Instead, he gathered to himself all that remained of his master's lesson. In the quiet years that followed, he devised a single work that would bind his path forever. In the fire of Orodruin, when the world still lay half-healed from ancient battle, Sauron poured much of his native power into a small and perfect circle of gold. The One Ring was more than a weapon. It was a mirror of his own thought. It was made to rule the other rings and to ensnare their bearers, to gather all scattered wills into one vast design. From that hour, his fate and his mind were chained to that instrument of control. What he could not seize by open force, he would draw to himself through the ring. Thus, his gaze grew narrow and terrible. To Sauron, any being of strong will, any heir of noble blood, was only another possible master of others, or another rival to be broken. Had he not seen the kings of Numenor fall before the shadow of his counsel, trading wisdom for pride, and pride for the worship of darkness and death? In his reckoning, power was the last refuge of all hearts. If they sought survival, they would seek mastery. If they sought mastery, they would seek the ring. Yet not all courage had perished. There remained in Middle-earth a different strength, woven of humility, of pity, of quiet self-denial. These were not merely virtues Sauron despised. They were colours his inner eye could scarcely behold. What does a mind, trained only in command, know of the healer who chooses to serve, or of the king who bends first to the wounded and the weak? Such choices lay outside his careful calculations, like paths that led into mist and never appeared upon his maps. And so, when at last his thought turned toward Aragorn, he perceived only a shadow of Numenor, a claimant to thrones, a will that must, in the end, either grasp at dominion or be crushed beneath it, a chieftain to corrupt or an enemy to destroy. He did not see the one who would refuse the ring even upon Amen-Hen, who would walk the paths of the dead not for his own glory, but to keep a fading hope alive. How could such a mind, bound to a circle of gold, foresee the moment when Aragorn would lift his eyes to the Palantir and reveal himself, and yet still leave the ring in other hands? In that single burning error lay the seed of Mordor's ruin, and as the darkness deepened over Gondor and the fire of Orodruin stirred once more, Sauron's blind certainty drove him toward a doom he could not name. What then did the Dark Lord truly see when Aragorn at last claimed the name of Elisar, and the enemy is upon us in his final strength? In the wild, under starlight, the hidden life of Aragorn. In that question lay the shadow of Sauron's failure, for he had gazed upon kings before and upon many who claimed lordship, yet never upon one who had been fashioned in secrecy beneath the stars. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now it is time to rest, and to follow Aragorn back into the quiet years where the Dark Lord's eye seldom turned. In the sheltered valley of Rivendell, when the memory of Isildur's fall was still a wound upon the world, a child was brought to the house of Elrond. There he was named Estel, which in the elven tongue means hope. Under that gentle name, his true lineage as Aragorn, son of Arathorn, last heir of Isildur, was veiled from the enemy, and for a long time even from himself. He walked the pillared halls and the green terraces as any fosterling might, learning lore and language, hearing of Númenor and of the elder days. While beyond the hidden valley, the darkness gathered, and his name was a secret held between very few. When at last the time came and the truth was revealed to him, the weight of it did not drive him to seize power, but to wander. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin along the long roads of the north. As a man grown, he took first not a crown, but a weathered cloak, and became Aragorn the Ranger, strider of Bree, the tall, travel-stained wanderer whom innkeepers mistrusted and simple folk avoided. Under that rough name he moved from hollow to hill and from hedge to hidden path, a silent guardian of the Shire and of Bree, standing against raiders, fell things out of the wild, and servants of the enemy who never knew whose hand had turned them back. Through long years he walked thus, unthanked and unthroned. While the fire of Mordor slept and then stirred again, he watched and waited and learned patience. Yet not all courage had perished. In the trackless dark of the weather hills, in winter storms upon the greenway, in sudden battle beneath trees where no song would ever be sung, he and his kin of the Dúnedain held the line, so that in the west there might still be simple peace and laughter, and children who had never heard the word ring. Nor was his hidden service bound to the north. Under other names he went south, and in Gondor and Rohan he served as a captain unknown, leading men in battle upon the fields of their own despair. He saw the white city from the lesser ways, and he learned the hearts of men, their fear before death, their small acts of courage, their longing for a king they scarcely remembered. He studied the craft of war, the counsels of stewards, the pride of riders beneath the sun, while remaining a shadow on the edge of their recorded time. Thus was Aragorn shaped into Elisar, the Elfstone, not by sudden greatness but by a long apprenticeship in humility and in hidden guardianship. What king, fashioned in such a manner, could Sauron ever have understood? To the Dark Lord, kingship was a tower of iron and domination, seized swiftly and held by fear. Aragorn's kingship was a quiet fire banked through nearly a lifetime, content to burn unseen until the hour required its full light. When at last he stepped from the wild into the councils of the great, he came not as one newly risen, but as one long prepared beyond the enemy's sight. And this unseen preparation would soon bend the war toward an ending Sauron had never conceived. The line of Elendil, a heritage Sauron. Thought. He knew his rising then was the flowering of a much older seed, one that reached back through ruin and long exile, to a time when the world itself seemed younger and nearer to the light. Long before the shadow of Mordor first lengthened over the lands of Middle-earth, there was another gift given to men, and another pride that rose like a bright flame, only to fall at last into smoke and darkness. Hello, friends. Settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin. For to understand why Sauron misread this quiet fire of a king, we must drift further back, into the dreamlike memory of Númenor, in the first days after the great wars against Morgoth, when the hosts of the Valar had broken the ancient enemy and the seas were remade. The Edain who had stood faithful were granted a star-shaped isle in the west, fair and green amid the encircling waves. There the Númenóreans grew tall and long-lived, skilled in craft and lore, and their white-sailed ships went out across the bright sea, bearing friendship and gifts to the Eldar, and receiving in turn wisdom and healing, and the memory of the blessed realm that lay still further beyond their sight. For a long time there was balance and reverence and a high, clear beauty, as though the world itself held its breath in quiet hope. Yet not all courage had perished in the darkness that remained, and not all malice either. When at last Sauron rose again in Middle-earth, Númenor came against him in such might that his armies broke and fled, and he, seeing that he could not prevail by open battle, laid aside his visible power and surrendered himself into the hands of the king. Was it not a strange thing that the great enemy should bow and speak fair words? In chains he crossed the sea, yet in truth he went as a serpent into the heart of the garden. There, with soft flattery and whispered counsel, he turned their glory against them. He fanned their fear of death until it became a fire that consumed wisdom, and he promised hidden strength, dominion without end, and a way to escape the doom of men. Pride swelled and faith withered, and in the end the tall island that had risen so proudly from the sea was dragged down into the deep, while Sauron, though his fair body perished, laughed in the darkness and returned to Middle-earth in spirit, confirmed in one bitter lesson, that the hearts of great kings among men could always be bent by terror of the grave and the hunger to rule. From the wreck of that downfall a remnant yet escaped. Elendil the Tall and his sons, Isildur and Anarion, steering through storm and fire, came at last to the shores of Middle-earth, bearing the memory of the West and the name of the faithful. In honour of the North and Gondor beside the great river, they raised new realms, and when Sauron gathered his strength once more, the line of Elendil met him not with flattery, but with open war. Upon the slopes of Orodruin he was cast down, his body hewn beneath the blades of Elendil and Gil-galad. And though Isildur took the ring, and was later betrayed by it beside the cold waters of the Anduin, Sauron drew from those ages another hard belief, that Númenórean blood, even in defiance, remained vulnerable to the same old snares. So when, long years later, he heard broken whispers of a wandering chieftain in the north, last of the Dúnedain, what else could he think? To Sauron this hidden heir was already known, a man of high lineage and secret pride, ambitious in his heart, fearful of death, and in the end certain to reach for power, if it were set within his grasp. The enemy is upon us, he had once heard upon the lips of kings, and he had watched those kings fall. Why should this one be different? Yet in that quiet misjudgment, in that old, unexamined certainty, the first crack in his final design had already begun to open, and through it a different kind of hope would soon pass, unseen by the eye that ever searched for its own reflection. A map from above, the late Third Age, and Sauron's calculations. From that first hairline fracture in his design, the eye turned outward again and ranged far over Middle-earth. It swept the long vales of Anduin, the white crown of Mindolluin above Minas Tirith, the green plains that rolled towards the west, and the broken, silent north where once proud kingdoms of men had stood. In that gaze the world became a board of war, marked by strongholds and roads, and the mustering of hosts. In the late days of the Third Age, when the shadows lengthened and the red light of Orodruin stained the low clouds, the realms of men were already divided and worn. Gondor still stood, but its borders were pressed by Harad in the south and by the wild east beyond the river, and its people were thinned by long war and slow despair. Rohan lay to the northwest, a land of riders upon open grass, brave and swift, yet vulnerable to treachery and to any blow that might fall upon its king. Farther still, beyond the weather hills and the tumbled lands of Arna's ruin, only scattered Dunedain wandered in secrecy, their watch unmarked by herald or trumpet. Sauron, rebuilding in Mordor behind the Black Mountains, weighed these lands with cold precision. Gondor, with its walls and its long memory of Numenor, he marked as the chief obstacle, the last great bastion that must be broken before his dominion could pour unhindered into the west. Rohan he saw as a useful hinge, a realm that, if bent or broken, would leave Gondor isolated, its flanks exposed, its courage shaken. The north he counted little, a region of old stones and forgotten names, where only minor threats might stir among the ruins. Upon this field he set his pieces. Denethor of Gondor he deemed proud and weary, a steward whose wisdom might be turned to despair by the very visions he sought in the Seeing Stone. Theoden of Rohan he measured as an aging king, beset by cares, whose will could be darkened and delayed until the hour of need was past. Saruman he counted as near one, a mind of great craft already leaning toward the promise of power. In each of these he trusted that fear or pride, or the slow poison of hopelessness would work its way, as once it had in the hearts of Númenórean kings. And where in all this was Aragorn, son of Arathorn? At most a faint name upon old scrolls, a possible claimant to a throne that had long stood empty, and in the present day a chieftain of a dwindling people who walked the wild in worn grey cloaks. To the eye that searched for armies and banners and rings of power, such a figure seemed small, scarcely worth a separate design. Hello, friends. As we follow that high, terrible gaze, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes and let our journey begin into the spaces it failed to see. For while Sauron marked the march of hosts and the fire of great engines, the quiet movements of a ranger in the north passed beneath his notice, like a single star half veiled by cloud. Yet not all courage had perished. In those hidden paths a different kind of strength was gathering, and soon it would begin to draw together the free peoples in ways no eye, however piercing, had foreseen. Quiet words in the dark, Aragorn's moral compass. In those hidden paths where the eye of Mordor seldom lingered, Aragorn's true strength was not measured by the clash of steel, but by quiet words spoken in the dark. Hello, friends. As you settle in comfortably and gently close your eyes, it is time to rest and to listen, for in such hushed moments of counsel and comfort, the heart of the heir of Isildur is revealed, and the limits of Sauron's understanding stand clear. When first he stepped from shadow in the common room of Bree, the hobbit saw only a weathered ranger, long of stride and grim of face, and the enemy as upon us seemed very near in their fear. Yet his voice, when he spoke aside to them, was low and steady, offering guidance rather than command, and reassurance rather than threat, as he laid before them the dangers of the road and the need for trust. In that dim corner where firelight flickered on worn boots and travel-stained cloak, he chose to protect their freedom instead of bending their will. What tyrant watching from a distant tower, would trouble to measure such a choice. Later in Rivendell, when wise voices gathered and the great of many kindreds debated the fate of the ring, Aragorn's counsel was measured and restrained. He did not thrust himself forward, though the blood of Elendil burned in his veins and the shards of Narsil lay near at hand, but waited upon the judgment of Elrond and the free debate of the council. When the fellowship was named, he accepted the charge to guard the ring-bearer, yet he did so as a companion and servant, not as a master. Again and again upon the long road he guided their steps, but he did not seize the ring, nor claim lordship over those who walked beside him. Could Sauron, who knew only domination and fear, imagine a will so strong that it refused to grasp at such power? On the journey south, when Boromir's impatience for Gondor's need grew sharp, Aragorn's answer was a gentle firmness, not the cruelty of wounded pride. He heard the grief and fear that lay beneath the sun of Denethor's words, and answered with patience, even when his own path to kingship seemed delayed and darkened. When war flared in Rohan, and later when the beacons of Gondor called, he turned aside from any swift road to a crown, choosing instead the slower way of service, hardship, and peril for the sake of many lives. In such decisions taken without witness upon wild hills and in ruined lands, there burned a quiet courage that Sauron could neither see nor value. For the Dark Lord expected that any strong leader would hoard advantage, hasten to secure his throne, and treat allies as tools to be spent and cast aside. His mind was fixed upon the ring and upon the memory of Númenórean kings whom he had long ago corrupted, and so he looked for arrogance, greed, and the hunger for immediate victory. Yet not all courage had perished. In Aragorn there lived a different fire, one that chose delay over easy triumph and mercy over fear, and the humble care of a wounded hobbit over the swift march of conquering hosts. Thus, when at last Aragorn stood upon the edge of his greatest choices, the eye that searched for a rival tyrant found instead a servant king, and was blinded by what it could not comprehend. But how would that misunderstanding shape the final moves of the great battle for Middle-earth, when the heir of Isildur stepped openly into the light and still refused the very power Sauron believed no mortal could deny? The ring as mirror. What Sauron expected of every strong will. In those shadowed calculations where the Dark Lord weighed armies and kings as pieces upon a board, there stood always at the centre a single, gleaming certainty, the ruling ring. To Sauron it was more than a weapon of war. It was a mirror. In its circle of gold he believed that every strong will would behold its own deepest hunger, and in time would stretch out a hand to claim it, for he himself had been so revealed. When he forged the ring in the fires of Orodruin, he poured into it not only his power, but his desire, his will to mastery over every living mind beneath the sky. And so he judged that any being mighty enough to perceive that power would be drawn, as iron to a lodestone, to wield it. Elves, wizards, men of great lineage, even the small folk of the western lands, all were measured by that same cold rule. If they were weak, they would fall and perish. If they were strong, they would take the ring and become in the end his rival and his likeness. In the long watch of his eye, this belief shaped every move. When word came that the wise had stirred, that Mithrandir walked again in the west, and the grey pilgrim had become white, Sauron did not imagine that such a one would seek the ring's unmaking. Rather, he feared and expected that a power of that stature, once it held the ring, would raise it high against him and attempt to cast him down by the very arts he knew best. The battle, as he foresaw it, would be between tyrants, and the only question was which darkness would rule. So, also with men. The memory of Númenor's fall still burned like a scar upon his ancient thought. He had seen proud kings bend at last for fear of death, for longing after unending time, for the promise of dominion over sea and shore. Therefore he deemed that if the ring came into the hands of any mortal lord, it would be taken up as a staff of survival and conquest, a last and desperate fire against the encroaching night. To refuse such a chance would be, in his eyes, a madness beyond reason. Hello, friends. So settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin into that darkened mind. For in Sauron's reckoning there was no path in which a free people chose loss over power or sacrifice over safety. The thought that a council of the wise would cast the ring into peril, entrusting it to a halfling and to the wild hazards of the road, lay outside the walls of his imagination. Why destroy the very thing that could raise one above all foes? Upon Aragorn this crooked vision fell with special weight. Here was a man of the West, of the ancient blood of Elendil, hardened by long years as a ranger beneath sun and storm, seasoned in battle beside the captains of Gondor and Rohan. In Sauron's eyes such a one, once he held the ring, would see in it a swift road to the White City reclaimed, to enemies broken, to banners of the Dunedain lifted high over every field of war. The enemy is upon us, that ring would whisper, take me, and I will make an end of them. Yet not all courage had perished. When Aragorn turned aside from that temptation, when he upheld Frodo's small and perilous errand instead of supplanting it with his own claim, he stepped beyond the map Sauron had drawn for the hearts of men, and in that unseen turning, a quiet doom for Mordor was already taking shape, waiting only for the last, great moves of the game to reveal how utterly the Dark Lord had misread the will of the heir he so feared. On the road with Strider, a sleep-slow journey through early deeds. And from that unseen turning of his heart, the tale must wander back along quieter roads, where the shape of Aragorn's life was carved in patience and in shadow. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring, and now it is time to rest. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin along the paths he walked when the world scarcely knew his name. In the long years of his early manhood, when the great powers of Middle-earth measured their strength and watched the wide lands, Aragorn moved as a single, tireless figure beneath the stars. He kept hidden watch over the Shire, that small green country whose folk spoke of rangers with half fear and half gratitude, never guessing that the tall, weathered wanderer at the borders was the heir of forgotten kings. Night after night he trod the hedgerows and the secret tracks, turning back raiders in the dark, hunting servants of the enemy through wet fields and silent copses. And when the danger passed, there were no banners raised, no songs, only a deeper, untroubled sleep for those who never knew how near the shadow had come. Along the broken fences of the north, and on the bare hills that few now named, he rode with his kin of the Dunedain, holding lines that no map of Mordor marked. There were small battles in the dripping woods, sudden clashes with orc hosts that crept westward, arrows whispering through the branches, blades meeting in the dimness under rain. Bodies were buried in shallow, lonely graves, and the grass grew over them, and the stories faded into campfire murmurs. What scholar in Barad Dûr would trouble to search for such traces or weigh such unrecorded courage? Yet not all courage had perished, for in time Aragorn went south in secret, and under another name. In Gondor he was Thorongil, the Eagle of the Star, a captain of stern counsel and swift hand, who came from the north with little tale of his past, and whose eyes were grave with distant memory. He served the steward with loyalty, learned the ways of that proud land, and at last led a daring raid upon the havens of Umbar, where the ships of the enemy lay thick upon the dark water. By night, the harbour was a forest of fire, masts and sails wrapped in sudden flame, the Black Fleet broken and scattered, and many years of fear burned away in a single stroke. But when the people of Gondor looked for their hero, he was gone, before any crown could be whispered, before lineage could be sought. Thorongil passed eastward over the mountains and vanished into the wild, leaving behind only rumour and a quiet gratitude in the hearts of those whose sons had returned from that battle. Why would a man step away from such glory, unless his road led by other stars than those Sauron counted? In Rohan also he dwelt for a time, riding beneath the wide sky with the horse lords, learning their tongue and their songs, sharing meat and mead in firelit halls, and standing with them against raiders from the dark edges of the world. The riders came to trust him, this tall stranger with the keen gaze and the healer's hands. Yet when his season there was fulfilled, he departed as softly as he had come, taking no place among their princes, leaving no monument save in memory. These were great deeds, and their consequences ran far, yet in the chronicles Sauron studied they were scarcely more than shadows at the margin, like footprints washed away by rain. His thought turned always to crowns, to open banners, to the loud claim of power, and so his gaze slid past the man who chose the narrow path of hidden service. In the next turning of our tale, we will see how that long, patient preparation met at last the open challenge of the eye, and how the quiet roads of the past gathered into one final march against the darkness. The Council of Elrond. A choice. Sauron could not imagine hello friends. The long roads of hidden service have brought us now to a quieter valley, where the sound of steel upon shield is replaced by the murmur of water upon stone. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring, and now it is time to rest. Yet the tale leads us into one more hall of council, before the last great battle is joined. In the house of Elrond at Rivendell, when autumn lay golden upon the Bruinen, and the air was cool and clear as a drawn blade, many came together beneath one roof. Elves sat in stillness, men in worn mail and travel-stained cloaks, dwarves with eyes like embers under stone, and small hobbits who had walked out of the Shire and into legend. Outside, the waterfalls fell in endless white veils, and the leaves drifted down in slow circles, as if time itself wished to linger and listen. There, in that circle of many peoples, the hidden years of Aragorn were spoken of openly at last. The name of Isildur was uttered, and the lineage of Elendil was recalled, and the shards of Narsil gleamed, waiting for the fire that would make them whole. In such a moment, when old prophecies stirred like waking birds, what might an heir of kings be expected to do? One could imagine a man stepping forward, hand outstretched, voice ringing to claim the ring, and the rule of all who sat before him. Yet Aragorn stood aside, tall and silent among the shadows of the pillars, and let others contend with words over the fate of the one. He did not demand, he did not grasp, he did not cry that the throne of Gondor and the weapon that had once brought Sauron low were his by right. Instead, he listened as Frodo trembled, as Boromir spoke of the White City and its need, as Elrond and Gandalf weighed peril against peril in that high hall above the falling waters. When at last the hard counsel was taken, and the path chosen was not mastery but near hopeless destruction, Aragorn bowed his will to it without protest. He offered not to bear the ring, but to guard the small bearer who had accepted that burden, to walk as shield and sword beside a halfling into the mouth of darkness. The ring might have been a swift road to his crown, a fire to bend the hearts of men and hasten the return of his house. Yet he turned instead toward slow danger and almost certain death. In the deeps of Barad-dûr had Sauron considered such a choice. His thought moved always along the lines of fear and desire, and he had broken the kings of Númenor by laying before them the very things they most craved. To him, the heir of Isildur before the ring must surely be as a starving man before bread. How could such a one refuse? How could any strong will see that golden circle and not reach for it? Yet not all courage had perished. In Rivendell, as the council ended and the fellowship was named, a quiet divergence opened, almost too small to see, between what the Dark Lord believed men must do and what one man actually chose. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes and let our journey begin toward that widening gap, where each step Aragorn took in humility and hidden strength carried him nearer to the Black Gate, and nearer to the moment when Sauron would discover too late that his own imagination had betrayed him. Helm's Deep and beyond, leadership in the shadow of the eye. Hello, friends. The road bends now toward Helm's Deep, and the night grows heavier about our tale. The day was long and full of fear, and now it is time to rest. Yet we must pass for a while through that valley where storm and steel once met beneath the watching eye. In the long hours before the battle, when the Westfold smoked and the wind carried the thin cries of the dispossessed, a slow, ominous cadence settled upon the land. Carts creaked along the rutted ways, bearing the old and the very young, while beside them walked men with empty scabbards, and women with eyes already red from weeping, and above them all the sky lowered, heavy with unfallen rain. Through this weary host moved Aragorn, tireless and unhurried, speaking softly to those who faltered, steadying a hand here, lifting a child there, and in his voice there was no false promise of safety, only the quiet assurance that courage still had meaning, even when the shadows seemed to have already chosen the hour of death. When at last the refugees passed within the ancient dyke, and the deeping wall rose about them like a stern stone cradle, Aragorn did not seek a high chamber to rest or a seat of command to claim. He walked the walls. He moved among the ranks of farmers and herdsmen, among boys whose spears shook in their hands, and to each he spoke of hope, not as a bright and careless word, but as a fire banked low against the wind, drawn from some source beyond mere odds and numbers. "The enemy is upon us," he told them with his grave, clear gaze. Yet not all courage had perished. Some would fall, perhaps many, yet none need fall in despair. There, beneath the stone vaults and upon the rain-slick battlements, his lineage might have given him cause to command, for he was Isildur's heir, of the same high blood that once had humbled Sauron upon the very slopes of Orodruin. Yet before Theoden King he bowed his head, offering counsel and strength, not rivalry. He rode as the king's champion, not as usurper, and when decisions were made, he spoke as one who serves, not as one who grasps. "What sort of lord is this?" Sauron might have asked, if Sauron had ever troubled to understand such a thing. "Who gains authority by yielding it, and gathers loyalty by honouring another's crown?" For in Mordor, command was a chain of iron and fear. Their will was broken and remade until nothing remained but obedience, and terror flowed downward from the dark tower like black water. In such a realm no captain rose by lifting others to stand beside him. No hope was kindled that did not serve the ring. How then could Sauron read the meaning of a man who walked the walls of a besieged fortress, not to drive his followers with threats, but to set their freedom alight within them, so that each chose, in that dreadful hour, to stand? If tidings of Helm's Deep ever reached the Dark Lord, carried in the whispers of spies or the twisted reports of those who fled, they would have spoken of an unusual chieftain of men. Bold, perhaps, strangely beloved, yet still, in his reckoning, a small matter beside the ring and the great wheels of war. A curiosity, not a keystone. How could such a man unmake Barad-dûr? How could a single human heart weigh against the vast design of ages? And yet, even as the rain fell at Helm's Deep and the horns of Rohan answered the thunder, another choice was already ripening in Aragorn's mind, a choice that Sauron's gaze, for all its searching fire, would never truly see coming. The Palantir confrontation. Aragorn's steps into the Eye's light night had broken upon Helm's Deep and passed, and the rain upon the stones of the Hornburg faded into a quieter dawn, yet in Aragorn's mind the storm had only just begun. The enemy is upon us, he knew, not only in the fields and valleys, but in the unseen realm of thought and will, where Sauron's gaze moved like a searching flame. And in that hidden battle he was already choosing his ground. When the ruin of Isengard was accomplished, and Saruman's proud voice fell silent in the tower of Orthanc, a strange stillness followed the rush of war. The great host of Ents withdrew to their watching. The waters lay cold in the broken circle of stone, and high above, in the dark shaft of the tower, there remained a single treasure that the fallen wizard had not mastered. In that time of uneasy rest, when victory tasted of smoke and ash, Aragorn came to the Orthanc stone, knowing that another, far more terrible mind might be waiting upon its light. Hello, friends. Settle in comfortably and gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin as we enter that chamber in thought. There stands a single man in the dimness, tall and weary from battle, his hands scarred, his raiment stained by rain and fire. Before him, upon a low table, lies the Palantir of Orthanc, veiled, yet already it seems to burn through its covering, as if a star had been caught and chained within a globe of crystal. He pauses. He could turn away. Yet not all courage had perished. When at last Aragorn takes the stone in his hands and casts aside the cloth, the darkness of the rooms is driven back by a sudden inner radiance, deep and perilous, as if a window had opened upon a vast, devouring night. He does not shrink. He does not avert his gaze. Instead, he bends his will forward and calls, and in that calling, he chooses to be seen. What kind of man steps unshielded into the eye's light, knowing that the greatest enemy of the age may look back? Aragorn's purpose in that moment is as sharp as the reforged blade at his side. He shows Sauron his face, no longer hidden under the name of Strider. He reveals Andúril, Flame of the West, shard of Elendel's sword made whole again, and in the gleam of that steel he declares his lineage and his claim to the throne of Gondor. He confirms the very fear that had long gnawed at Sauron's thought, that a king of men, sprung from the ancient Númenórean line that once cast him down, is rising again in the west. On the surface, it is exactly what Sauron expects. Here is a rival warlord, proud and unbending, who might seize the ring if he can, and with it challenge the Dark Tower for mastery of Middle-earth. In the long memory of Sauron, kings of men have always yielded at last to the hunger for power. Why should this one be different? Why should any mortal heart offered the ring choose death and humility over dominion and glory? Yet in this, Sauron reads only the outer script of the tale and not the secret writing beneath. He sees the sword, but not the hands that will later heal the wounded in Minas Tirith. He perceives a captain of hosts, but not the healer king who will march to the Black Gate as a living sacrifice, a decoy to draw his eye away from a hobbit creeping in the dust of Mordor. He imagines a claimant to the ring because he cannot imagine a guardian who refuses it. And so, even as his wrath is kindled and his war hastened by this revelation, the deeper design of Aragorn's heart remains veiled from him. In that meeting of wills through the Palantir, Sauron believes he has taken the measure of his foe and hastens to gather his hosts for the final battle. Yet what if the very haste of Mordor, the very rush of its darkness, is the snare into which it will fall? As the armies of the West begin to move, and the last march is prepared, Sauron's misreading of this single man will shape the doom of his own realm. Free will against the dark. Why Sauron could not predict Aragorn. Thus the hosts of the West move beneath gathering cloud, and in the high tower of Barad-dûr the eye is restless, sweeping the plains in ceaseless search. Sauron believes the pattern is set, the last battle already written in the fire of his will. Yet there is one thing his gaze has never truly grasped, the quiet, unforced freedom of a single human heart. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring, and now it is time to rest. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes and let our journey begin. For I will tell you a kind legend of will and choice, of a dark lord who sought to master every mind, and of a man who could not be mastered. For long ages Sauron has practiced domination, and in that long practice he has learned to read fear and desire as a captain reads the ground before a battle. To him, elves and men and dwarves are pieces upon a board, each driven by hunger, by terror, by longing for power or safety, so that once their secret dread is known, their next step may be forced. When the ring is in play, he is more certain still, for he believes that any strong will, if pressed hard enough, will reach for that single burning hope, Yet not all courage had perished. In Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Sauron faces a pattern that will not hold. This man of the north refuses the ring when it might already be his. He lays it in Frodo's keeping and chooses the hard road of guardianship instead. He delays his own coronation when many would seize the White City at once, walking still as a ranger beneath the shadows, serving Gondor and Rohan in secret rather than ruling them by name. Who would choose the long hidden path when a crown waits within reach? When the time comes to pass under the Dweimorberg, Aragorn turns aside from the safer road and walks the paths of the dead, risking madness and death in a place where no living host may follow. Later, before the Black Gate, he marches into almost certain ruin, not to grasp dominion, but to draw the eye away from a small and weary ring-bearer, creeping through ash and darkness. To a mind like Sauron's, such choices seem wild, almost senseless. How can one calculate a foe who spends his life as though it were a coin to be freely given? Yet these are not random turns of fortune. They spring from a freely embraced duty, from love of those who stand beside him in the dust of battle, and from a hope that reaches beyond his own survival. Aragorn trusts in mercy, in the healing of the houses after the war, in a realm where the sword is sheathed. Sauron, who long ago cast aside mercy and trust as weakness, has no measure for such things. To him, hope is only another form of hunger, never a reason to lay power down. In this way, true freedom appears as madness to the tyrant's eye. For freedom allows sacrifice where fear would cling, and mercy where vengeance would strike, and trust in an unseen dawn when all the sky is black. The enemy is upon us, whispers the world, and Sauron expects every heart to answer with grasping and despair. Aragorn answers with open hands, so his very will becomes a veil. Sauron may see the grey-cloaked figure upon the field, may feel the challenge through the palantir like a spark against his darkness. Yet the inner choice of this man remains hidden, because it is not ruled by the same fire. What, then, will such a man dare at the very gates of doom, when all other plans have failed? In that unanswered question lies a crack in Sauron's design, and through so small a crack, the last light of Middle-earth will seek to pass. The paths of the dead, a king's authority, Sauron never counted on. In that unanswered question where Sauron's thought faltered, another path was already opening, far from the walls of Mordor and the red glare of the eye. Night had fallen upon the White Mountains, and a wind without warmth moved among the black pines. There, at the forgotten entrance of the Dimholt, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, stood before a door of shadow that seemed older than stone, older than the kingdoms of men, older almost than memory itself. Hello, friends. The enemy is upon us, yet not in clashing mail and ringing steel, but in silence, in the unseen, in the chill that gathers when the living draw near to the realm of the unquiet dead. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin. For I will tell you a kind legend of a road that few dared to tread, and of a kingly authority Sauron never learned to fear. In the grey light beneath the mountain, the air itself seemed to hesitate. No bird called, no leaf stirred. A cold deeper than winter clung to the roots of the hills, and the black archway yawned like a wound in the world. To step forward required a courage of a different sort than that of open battle, for there was no host to see, no banner to follow, only a whispering darkness that promised neither glory nor song, only the testing of the heart. Yet not all courage had perished. Aragorn passed within, and the shadows closed about him. Long ages before, when the world was younger and the fire of Númenor was still bright, the men of the mountains had sworn an oath to Isildur to come to his aid when the great war against Sauron was at hand. But fear of the Dark Lord turned them aside, and in the hour of need they came not. For this treachery they were bound beneath a curse, held in unrest between life and death, until the day when the true heir of Isildur should summon them to fulfill their broken word. Here, in this silent road of bones and whispers, Aragorn's power was revealed as something Sauron had never truly understood. It was not brute force, nor the terror of the lash and the rack, nor the cruel delight in binding wills that the Dark Lord had long practiced. It was a lawful, almost sacred claim, rooted in the memory of promises and in the right to both command and to release. When he called the dead to him, he spoke not as a tyrant, but as the keeper of an ancient trust. For Sauron, oaths had ever been tools to twist, chains to tighten, snares to draw closed about the weak. He could scarcely imagine that a host might rise from forgotten barrows, not for fear of torment, but in the last hope of mercy, yearning for an end to shame. What place was there in his dark reckoning for an army that followed a living man through terror and gloom, because he alone held the power to set them free? So it was that beneath the mountain, while the eye searched elsewhere for captains and for rings and for visible banners of war, a hidden strength gathered around Aragorn, bound not by dread of his wrath, but by the slender, stubborn hope that at last their oath might be made whole. What would such a host do when loosed upon a world already trembling at the shadow of Mordor? And how could the Dark Lord reckon with a power drawn from the very realm of death itself? The Healer King, houses of healing, and a power Sauron despised. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now it is time to rest. Yet even in rest there are memories of battle and of a different kind of courage, for not all deeds of war are wrought with sword and spear. In the dark hours after the battle of the Pelennor fields, when the great fires upon the plain still smouldered and the cries of the wounded rose like a low wind through the stone ways of Minas Tirith, there lay a quieter field of struggle within the houses of healing. There the air was heavy with the mingled scent of smoke and athelas, of sweat and blood, and the faint sweetness of crushed leaves, and healers moved softly between rows of pallets where men and hobbits and the fair folk of Rohan hovered between life and death. Outside, the city counted its dead. Inside it waited in hushed dread for those who might yet be called back from the shadow. When Aragorn came to that place, he came not as a conqueror striding into a taken city, but as a weary wanderer returning at last to a long foretold task. His steps were light upon the stone, his voice low, and his presence, though grave and kingly, was like cool water after fire. He bent over Faramir, whose spirit had turned inward, fleeing from the burning madness of his father and the black breath of the enemy, and with gentle words he named him, calling him back from far places. His hands, that had wielded sword and broken the host of Mordor upon the fields, now moved with the care of a minstrel over a cherished harp, and where they passed, the fever lessened and the harsh breathing grew calm. So it was also with Éowyn of Rohan, whose arm lay cold from the touch of the Witch King, and with Merry the Hobbit, small and pale beneath linen stained from battle. Over each he laboured with Athelas, and the leaves, when bruised in water by his hand, gave forth a fragrance that seemed to drive back darkness itself, as though some memory of sunlit gardens long lost to the world awoke for a brief time in that house of sorrow. Old women of Gondor, keepers of half-forgotten lore, whispered then the ancient saying that the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and thus shall the rightful king be known. In that moment, Aragorn's authority stood revealed not in banners or in the fall of enemies, but in the quiet mending of what war had broken. What place had such a power in the counsels of Sauron? In his thought, strength was measured by fear and by the number of slaves who bent the knee, by towers razed and forests burned, by how swiftly a will could crush resistance and hasten death. Healing was to him at best a pause between torments, at worst a weakness that delayed the final mastery of all things. A lord who proved his kingship by easing pain, by restoring the freedom of another's spirit rather than chaining it, lay wholly outside his esteem and beyond his comprehension. Even had tidings of that night in the houses of healing crept through spies and whispers to the Black Land, what would the Dark Lord have made of them? A captain of men who spent his strength upon the broken, while the enemy is upon us, and the last battle gathers. To Sauron such tales would have seemed folly, or some soft irrelevance beside the hard iron of war. Yet not all courage had perished. In the hearts of those who woke to the sound of Aragorn's voice, a different fire was kindled, a quiet resolve to stand to the last, beside a king who healed rather than devoured. And this hidden strength would weigh upon the doom of Mordor in ways the eye upon its dark tower never truly saw. The march to the Black Gate, a feint, built on misunderstanding. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and heavy with thought. And now it is time to rest. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin again upon the fields that lie between Minas Tirith and the shadow of Mordor, where a different kind of courage was asked of the hearts of men. For when the fires of battle had at last died down before the White City, and the cries of the wounded faded into weary silence, there came a quieter gathering, no less grave than any clash of steel. In a chamber of stone beneath banners that still smelled of smoke, Gandalf, Aragorn, and the captains of the West sat together, and they measured not their strength, but their weakness. They knew that their host was spent, that the enemy yet had unnumbered legions, and that somewhere far within the Black Land, two small figures still crept beneath a sky of ash. How might they buy those fragile hours that stood between hope and death? In that council, where every face was lined with care, Gandalf spoke of Sauron's mind, fixed like iron upon the ring. The Dark Lord, he said, could not imagine that any will, once it touched that perilous gold, would refuse to wield it. To him, all hearts were mirrors of his own, seeking mastery, dreading loss, forever turning toward power, as a moth to fire. Was it not so that he had broken the kings of old Númenor, bending their pride until they fell into darkness at his whisper? Then Aragorn rose, still bearing the weariness of war, yet crowned now in the quiet authority of the returning king. He agreed to lead a smaller host out from the safety of the city, not in any vain dream of storming the Dark Tower, but as a living lure set before the eye. They would march to the very black gate, banners unfurled, as if daring Sauron to single combat. Their hope was not in victory of arms, but in the certainty that Sauron would misread such audacity. Would he not believe that this newly revealed king, this heir of Isildur who had shown himself in the Palantir, must be seeking to challenge him with the ring in hand? Thus, a terrible bargain was struck. The captains consented to ride into a battle they could not win, trusting that the enemy would see in Aragorn only what lay within his own poisoned thought. Another lord of men, grasping proud, eager to seize advantage while Mordor reeled. Yet not all courage had perished. In Aragorn there was a strange self-forgetfulness, a willingness to stake his life, and the lives of those who loved him, upon a feint that depended for its success upon the enemy's blindness to the true nature of his heart. So, the host of the West set forth, a thin line of banners moving against the dark horizon, and in Barad-dûr the eye stirred and narrowed, drawn toward this seeming challenge. The enemy is upon us, thought Sauron, and he gathered his strength to crush what he believed was the last, desperate throw of a rival ringlord. Yet while his gaze burned outward, what passed, unseen, within the very shadows of his own land? Upon that hidden path, and upon the moment when the eye finally turned, the doom of Middle-earth now hung, trembling. Hope beyond sight, prophecy, song, and the hidden thread of Estelle. In that hour when the eye searched outward, fierce and unblinking, it did not turn inward upon the quieter currents that had long been moving beneath the surface of the world. For there was another sight at work, older than Barad-dûr and deeper than any Palantir, a sight that did not rest upon stone towers or marching hosts, but upon the hidden thread of hope that the wise named Estelle. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring, and now it is time to rest. So settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin, not upon the black plains of Gorgoroth, but far earlier, in the sheltered halls of Rivendell, where a small boy once bore a name that was also a promise, Estelle. In the tongue of the Eldar, it meant hope, yet not the light and passing thing that rises and falls with the fortunes of battle, but a steadier trust, laid upon a pattern that mortal minds could only partly discern. Elrond, who had seen the rise and fall of kingdoms, did not give that name lightly. He saw in Aragorn a line reaching back to Elendel and beyond, and a future that might yet be healed. Was this hope mere wish, or was it a quiet answer to songs and sayings older than the Third Age itself? For in the west of Middle-earth there had long been murmurs, verses half-remembered in Gondor, prophecies spoken in the north, and lays among the Dúnedain that told of a king returning when the shadow grew deepest. There were songs of the white tree flowering again, of the sword that was broken made whole, of hands that would bring healing where death and darkness had walked. Such words were not laws of iron, yet they moved hearts and shaped choices, and prepared the minds of men to receive a leader when he should at last stand forth. To Sauron, who had long ago cast aside any thought of a will higher than his own, these things were no more than superstition, or at best tools to bend and poison. Prophecy, in his reckoning, was either a trick to ensnare the weak, or a chain that he would seize and turn to his own design. That there might be a music he did not conduct, a destiny that could run counter to his will, was a thought he thrust aside as folly. How could any tale end save in the triumph of the stronger hand? Yet not all courage had perished. While the eye scorned such whispers, Aragorn's life moved in quiet harmony with them. He waited long years in the wild, a chieftain without a crown, serving in secret in Gondor and Rohan, guarding borders that scarcely knew his name. He bore the reforged sword, yet held back from open claim, trusting that there was a right time that no mere calculation of strength could foretell. Was this delay weakness, as Sauron would judge it, or a deeper obedience to that unseen pattern of Estelle? When the war at last burst into open flame, Aragorn's choices ran contrary to every measure of visible power. He refused the ring when it was within his grasp. He staked all upon the slender hope that a hobbit, small and weary, might walk unseen where armies could not go. He marched upon the Black Gate with a host that could not win by force, using Sauron's own expectation of greed and fear against him, and trusting that unseen deeds in Mordor weighed more than any banner he might raise. So there grew, through elvish foresight, Númenórean memory, and the simple faith of the Shire folk and the Dúnedain, a web of meaning that Sauron's eye, fixed upon armies and artifacts, could not truly behold. It was as if two battles were fought at once, one of steel and fire that the Dark Lord watched keenly, and another of trust and quiet endurance that he scarcely reckoned. And as the last moves were set upon the board, which of these struggles would prove the truer contest for the fate of Middle-earth? Allies from the edges, unexpected friendships, Sauron overlooked. And in that unseen contest, where trust and quiet endurance weighed against terror and iron will, another strength began to move, almost beyond the sight of the eye that searched the world. For in the north, far from the great roads of war, there rode a company whose very existence lay in the margins of Sauron's thought, though their lineage reached back to the ancient kings he most feared. They came as shadows over the empty leagues, grey-cloaked beneath the stars, the Dúnedain of the north, Aragorn's own people. In long years of wandering he had guarded their scattered homes, and they had guarded his name in silence, while the enemy grew and the world forgot. When the hour was darkest and the road to Gondor was hedged with peril and doubt, they answered his unspoken summons without trumpet or herald, bringing with them not only keen blades, but a quiet loyalty that no ring had purchased and no shadow had broken. Could Sauron, counting captains and citadels, truly weigh such a bond? Hello, friends. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin, for I will tell you a kind legend of friendships that grew at the edges of great events, and of how they shaped the last battle against the darkness. Long before the beacons of Gondor flamed across the mountain ridges, Aragorn had ridden in other guises beside the horse lords of Rohan. Under many names he had hunted their foes, guarded their borders, and spoken with their kings in halls bright with fire and song. When Theoden rode at last to the aid of Minas Tirith, it was not only the red light of burning beacons that stirred his heart, but the memory of a tall wanderer whose counsel had never failed, and whose respect had never been mingled with pride. Thus the riders of Rohan came like a sudden storm upon Sauron's host, and in their charge there moved the long patience of years, the slow weaving of trust between a hidden king and a people of the plains. Yet not all courage had perished. In a small land west of the Wild, under green hills and quiet skies, dwelt the hobbits, whom Sauron scarcely named in his counsels. To him, they were too small for fear, too humble for wrath. Yet from among them came those who walked beside Aragorn through peril and shadow, who trusted his voice upon the road, and whose simple steadfastness bore the very ring that Sauron sought above all things. How could a mind that measured only crowns and citadels understand that the fate of his empire might hang upon such companions? There were others still. A broken steward whom Aragorn would heal rather than cast aside. A cursed host beneath the mountain, whom he would summon not with chains, but with the rightful claim of a king who yet offered release. In all these he saw worth where others saw only weakness or ruin. Sauron looked for great lords and mighty artifacts. Aragorn listened for quieter voices, and gathered to himself those whom fear and scorn had driven to the edges of the world. It is time to rest, but consider this for a moment before sleep. In a war of hosts and towers, might the true turning of the tide lie in such overlooked friendships? As the story moves toward the last desperate march, we shall see how Sauron's contempt for the small and the humble left a gap in his armor that no sword could have hewn. If you were Sauron, the one choice you couldn't explain yet, not all courage had perished, for even in the councils of the dark there were things unseen and hearts unread. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now it is time to rest. So settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin upon a quieter road of thought. For a little while I will tell you a kind legend in a different manner. Imagine, if you will, that you are not beside Aragorn in the camp of the West, but seated instead upon the dark throne of Barad-dûr. Imagine that you are Sauron, ancient beyond the memory of men, a spirit of fire bound in a terrible form, who has watched the ages pass like shadows across a plain. To you, every will is a weapon, and every heart is moved at last by fear of death or hunger for dominion. From such a height, look now upon Aragorn. You see a man of the West, of Númenórean blood, strong in bearing, steady in war. Once he walked as a nameless ranger, strider in the wild, content to pass through villages and kingdoms like a shadow, while the world forgot the line of Elendil. Later he takes the paths of the dead. He heals the sick in the houses of healing. He bears the sword that was broken. Which of these choices from the throne of Mordor would seem most strange to you? Consider first his long years of secrecy. To Sauron's mind, a true heir would seize banners, call hosts and cry his name aloud so that allies and enemies alike would tremble. Power declares itself. So these hidden decades must seem, to such an enemy, either cowardice or a cunning mask before the final grasp. Who would choose obscurity if the world might be taken by storm? Then think of the ring, passing within arm's reach of Aragorn in the wild, glittering with the promise of mastery. Sauron, who poured his own strength into that circle of gold, can imagine many things, but not this, that a man who could claim it will not. To his eye, Aragorn's refusal can only be a ruse, a delay, a secret plan to wield it later when all rivals are removed. For what lord of men has ever turned aside from such a weapon if the world lay before him like prey? And, at the last, behold the march to the Black Gate. The enemy is upon us, and Aragorn leads a smaller host against a fortress that no living captain believes he can overthrow. From Sauron's tower, this must appear as madness, or as some desperate bid to snatch the ring in the confusion of battle. That it is instead a sacrifice, a feint to draw the eye away from two small travellers in Mordor's very dust, lies outside his thought, for he reads all things as fear, greed, and ambition, and has no measure for love, duty, or self-chosen death. So, as you rest, carry this quiet question with you. Of all Aragorn's roads, which one would have bewildered Sauron most, and why? Hold that small thread of wonder, for in the next part of our tale, we shall follow it toward the very shadow of the gate, where hope and despair walk side by side. Denethor and Aragorn, two visions of men. Sauron, exploited and missed hello friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring, and now it is time to rest. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin once more in the high halls of Gondor, where two very different men stood beneath the same shadow, and where Sauron read one heart truly, and another not at all. In the long years before the War of the Ring, when the fires of Mordor had not yet burst forth in open battle, Denethor, steward of Gondor, bore a heavy crownless burden. He watched the frontiers shrink, he counted the fallen after each raid, and he felt, year by weary year, the slow encroaching weight of the enemy. In his hidden chamber high in Minas Tirith, he turned at last to a secret stone, the Palantir of the tower, seeking knowledge and strength, and instead he found an eye that had waited for him. Through that dark glass Sauron did not lie to Denethor, for he had no need. He showed him vast hosts gathering in Gorgoroth, black sails upon the seas, and the terrible engines of war that would grind the White City to dust. He veiled from him only the small lights of hope that were kindled far away, a king in exile, a ring-bearer crossing wild lands, old alliances stirring from long sleep. Denethor saw the fire and the iron and the certain death, and in his pride he believed that he alone beheld the full measure of the darkness. Thus the steward, already worn and wounded in spirit, came to despair. He measured Gondor against Mordor and found no balance, and in his heart he accepted defeat before the last battle had even been joined. To Sauron, this was as it should be. Men, he believed, would always bend or break when the enemy is upon us, when fear and weariness pressed upon them without rest. In Denethor, Sauron saw his own judgment confirmed, and he trusted that vision. Yet not all courage had perished. For when Aragorn at last took the Orthanc stone in his hands, in the deep night after Gandalf rode from Helm's Deep, he did not creep in secret before the eye. He revealed himself in full, the sword reforged, the name of Elendel's heir, the claim upon the throne of Gondor. Where Denethor had been drawn, Aragorn advanced. Where the steward had sought to read the enemy, the hidden king chose to be read, and to be misread. In that stern encounter, Sauron expected another mind that would quail, or else would grasp in greed for the ring. Instead, Aragorn neither despaired nor seized for forbidden power. He used the Palantir as a signal fire to hasten Sauron's hand, to draw the gaze of the Dark Lord away from the small and perilous road of the ring-bearer and toward the open challenge of the West. Who would dare such a peril if he were not already prepared to be broken for others' sake, even unto death? Sauron, who had shattered Denethor, looked upon this new claimant and searched for the same hidden cracks. He saw a man of Numenor, and remembered kings he had long ago seduced and overthrown. He saw a mortal will of great stature, and he assumed that, in time, it would turn aside toward dominion, just as his own had done. He didn't understand a hope tempered in long obscurity, a kingship forged in wandering and service, a heart that had chosen loss and sacrifice again and again before ever it stood before the eye. In misreading Aragorn while reading Denethor aright, Sauron revealed the narrowness of his wisdom. He could foresee the fall of a steward who clung to power and knowledge, but not the rise of a king who was ready to lay both down. And so the Dark Lord moved his hosts as if he faced another Denethor upon the walls, while beyond his sight a different kind of man walked toward the Black Gate. As you rest, let this image linger. Two figures in the high citadel, one consumed by visions of ruin, the other walking calmly into them. In the next part of our tale, we shall follow Aragorn from that silent contest of wills towards the very fields before Mordor, and we shall see how far Sauron's mistake would lead his armies, and how near it would bring the final unmasking of the returning king. Why Aragorn never took the ring, a decision outside the Dark Lord's logic. And so we follow him now, friends, from that high chamber in Minas Tirith, toward the long road that led, not to mastery through the ring, but to a different kind of victory. Night has already fallen upon the White City, and the day was long and tiring. And now it is time to rest, and to look more closely at the choice that Sauron never understood. For Aragorn's refusal of the ring did not begin at the Black Gate, nor even in the Tower of Stone where he held the Palantir and showed himself to the eye. It began far earlier, in quieter moments when the great weapon lay within his reach. In the house of Elrond at Rivendell, when the council first spoke of the quest, he might have risen, named himself fully, and stretched out his hand to claim the ring as heir of Isildur. Later, on the long road south, as the Fellowship moved through wild and winter, he walked often beside the ring-bearer, and the gold band was never far from his grasp. After the fall of Gandalf in Moria, when grief lay heavy and the company faltered, he took command in sorrow and in silence. There, in the dark hollows of their journey, when hope seemed thin and the enemy was upon them at every turn, another man might have reasoned that the ring in a strong hand would save his friends from death. And at last, when the Fellowship broke at Amon Hen, when Boromir fell and Frodo vanished into the wild, the ring slipped utterly beyond his sight, yet for a brief time its fate still lay within his power to pursue or to abandon. In each of these hours the path of Isildur opened before him. In each of these hours he turned away. This was more than prudence. It was a conscious severing of a dark inheritance, a quiet oath spoken in deed rather than in words. Aragorn had carried from childhood the knowledge that his forefather had stood over the fire of Orodruin and chosen possession instead of surrender. He knew that the very name Isildur's heir was a wound in the memory of Elrond and the Eldar. So when the ring came at last into his story, he answered Isildur's choice with his own. Where Isildur kept, Aragorn would release. Where Isildur grasped, Aragorn would guide another hand to let go. Yet not all courage had perished. Long before he came to Gondor in the raiment of a king, Aragorn had walked the secret paths of the Dúnedain as a ranger, serving in shadow, giving strength and counsel to lands that never knew his true name. In the wild he learned to cherish small, hidden victories, a village spared, a road kept safe, a single life drawn back from death. For such a man, power was not a bright crown or a weapon of fire, but the steady fulfillment of duty when no heralds watched. What then was the ring to such a soul, save an empty promise of dominion that would devour the very people he had spent long years to shield? Sauron, who had once ensnared Númenórean kings with gifts far less perilous than this, could not imagine such a mind. To him, the last true heir of Elendil must, in the end, resemble Ar-Pharazôn and Isildur, and all the proud lords who had come before, ambitious, hungry, ready to seize the one weapon that could set the world beneath his feet. He had seen the hearts of mighty men fail before smaller lures. How then could he conceive that this man, offered the greatest instrument of power ever wrought, would let it pass by again and again, as a thing forbidden to his hand? So when Aragorn chose instead to wield only the authority that was rightly his, to heal with Athelas in the houses of healing, to summon the dead beneath the mountains, and to march at last upon the Black Gate, with banners unfurled yet with no ring upon his finger, Sauron read these signs as proof that the ring was already turned against him by some rival will. He could not read them as they truly were, the marks of a king who had refused the ring so completely that his very strategy was shaped around its destruction rather than its use. In the end, this single, steadfast refusal, repeated from Rivendell to Amon Hen and confirmed before the very walls of Mordor, stood as the clearest sign that Sauron had never truly seen the man who opposed him. While the Dark Lord searched for a claimant to his own dark legacy, the true heir of Elendil walked another road entirely, one that would bring him to the Black Gate with empty hands, even as, far away, a small and weary hobbit crept toward the fire. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin toward that last march, where the misunderstanding of one will and the faithfulness of another would decide the fate of Middle-earth. After the fall, Aragorn's reign and the kind of king Sauron never imagined in the quiet that followed that last march. When the fire of battle had passed and the great ring lay in ruin, the world did not end in darkness, as Sauron had so long desired, but in a kind of dawn. The Black Gate was broken, the hosts were scattered, and a wind from the west swept the reek of Mordor from the sky. Yet the truest answer to Sauron's will came not upon the battlefield, but in what followed after. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now it is time to rest and to look, as if from a high and gentle height, upon the early days of the reign that Sauron never understood. In the city of the kings, the white stone was washed and mended, and banners of the tree and stars were unfurled where once only fear had walked. When at last Aragorn came to his coronation, he came not as a tyrant borne upon chains, but on foot, beneath the clear morning, crowned by the hand of a friend, and greeted with songs from many tongues. High upon the slopes of Mindolluin, the withered line of the white tree was renewed, and a young sapling sprung from elder days put forth tender leaves. Around it in time the city blossomed also, and exiles long banished from Gondor returned, as if some deep winter had broken and forgotten birds had found their way home. In those first years, his strength was shown not in new conquests, but in mercy. The men of the east and south who had come in the host of the enemy were not all swept away in wrath. Many he pardoned, and to some he gave lands to till, that the memory of battle might be healed by the slow labour of the plough. Ruined fields were sown again, broken roads were raised, and the black scars upon Ithilien began to fade beneath green leaves. He remembered the oath of the dead and released them. He remembered the riders of Rohan and bound that friendship with honour, and he remembered the small hands that had borne the ring, setting their names high in his heart. Yet he did not forge an empire of fear from his victory. Rohan stood beside Gondor, not beneath it, and its kings rode free beneath their own banners. In the far north he restored the realm of Arnor, not as a chain upon distant lands, but as a protection for wandering folk and hidden valleys. As for the Shire, that quiet green country whose courage had helped to unmake the ring, he set it apart, under his protection yet beyond the direct reach of his rule, so that no great lord should trouble its peace. What kind of king chooses to rule less when all the world lies open before him? Sauron had known only one pattern. In his thought, power must gather into a single hand. All wills must bend or be broken, and allies are but servants who have not yet felt the full weight of the chain. A city renewed for its own sake, a people left free to sing their own songs, a realm that measured its strength in healed lands rather than in marching hosts. These things lay beyond his sight. Had he looked from the ruin of Barad-dûr and seen the white city crowned with a living tree, had he heard the laughter in the fields of Ithilien and the quiet in the Shire, what would he have made of it? A king whose greatest victories were invisible to the eye, whose power grew as he loosened his grasp, whose answer to death and darkness was the slow work of restoration and the guarded freedom of many peoples, not the iron safety of one will. Yet not all courage had perished, and in the reign of Elessar it walked in softer ways, in patience and in mercy, setting the stage for a peace that the servants of Shadow could neither foresee nor endure. The heart of the misunderstanding, power, mercy, and the human soul. And so, as the reign of Elessar unfolded in quiet streets and in the slow mending of old wounds, the true heart of the long struggle was laid bare. For in the end it was not only a battle of armies and of rings, but a battle between two ways of seeing the world, so different that they passed one another like shadows at dusk, never truly touching. Sauron's mind had been shaped for ages by a single hard creed. Power was the highest good. Power ordered the world, bent chaos into form, and silenced all rival wills. Fear was the surest tool, for fear could drive even the proudest heart to the ground and make it crawl. In his thought, every choice could be measured in the scales of self-preservation and domination, as if all hearts were iron coins stamped with the same image, and only the weight of desire differed. Thus, when he looked out from the dark tower, what did he see? He saw hosts moving like pieces upon a board, captains grasping for glory, kings seeking safety for their realms. He had broken the kings of Númenor with such measures, and so he believed that any son of that house, if given the chance, would reach for the ring as for a crown of fire. To him, Aragorn was another claimant, another hand that would, in time, close upon the forbidden gold. Yet not all courage had perished. In the hidden years of the North, Aragorn's heart had been schooled in a different law. He chose mercy over vengeance, sparing foes when hatred would have been easier, and bearing long grief without turning it into cruelty. He took upon himself the life of a ranger, of strider in the wild, serving Gondor and Rohan in secret, setting service above his own advancement and walking far from the thrones that were his by right. When darkness pressed close, he chose hope over despair, not because the odds were in his favor, but because hope itself was a duty. These two visions did not merely differ, they could scarcely speak to one another. When Aragorn refused the ring, Sauron read only hidden ambition. When Aragorn revealed himself in the Palantir, he saw only a rival power, not a steward of many free wills. The same march upon the Black Gate that was, in truth, a perilous act of self-offering, he interpreted as grasping pride. How can one who has forgotten the very word for mercy understand a deed of sacrifice? Sauron's failure, then, was not a lack of sight. He saw the Grey Company ride. He saw the standard of Elendil unfurled. He saw the healers' hands in the houses of healing, though he did not know what he saw. His was a famine of understanding, a blindness to the inner logic of a heart that would rather die in a hopeless battle than live as a tyrant. To such a heart, power was a burden to be carried for others, not a prize. Hello, friends. So settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin into this quiet truth. The greatest blindness of evil is its refusal to believe that true goodness exists. Because Sauron could not imagine a king who would kneel to tend the wounded, or a victor who would choose mercy when the enemy was upon us, he could never truly see Aragorn, nor foresee the small, stubborn mercies that would at last unmake his dark design. And in that unseen place, where mercy and humility walk side by side, the next turning of the tale was already waiting, like a hidden star behind the smoke of war. A soft reprise, walking once more beside Strider in memory. And so, from that hidden star behind the smoke of war, let us walk backward along the roads where Aragorn passed like a quiet flame in the wind, steady and unnoticed by the great engines of fear that Sauron had set in motion. For the shadow that brooded in Barad-dûr has already spoken its part, and now it is time to rest with the smaller lights that moved beneath its gaze. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now it is time to rest. So settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin once more, not in battle or in fire, but in the soft remembrance of a man who walked many paths before he was named king. First, let the mind return to the inn at Bree, where rain whispered upon crooked roofs, and the common room glowed with low, amber fire. In a shadowed corner sat Strider, his cloak damp with the night's weather, the smell of wet leather and smoke clinging to him, as closely as his many secrets. While others laughed or muttered of distant tidings, he watched the door in silence, choosing to be a guardian rather than a guest. His long hands wrapped about a simple cup, his sharp eyes softened whenever the hobbits glanced his way. Then the road lengthens, and we are upon the wild paths of the north, where the air is thin and cold, and the stars hang like white spears above the empty hills. The grass is silver with dew, and the only sound is the small, living crackle of a campfire, breathing sparks into the dark. There Strider keeps watch while the hobbits sleep, his back against a stone, his cloak drawn close, the faint murmur of his voice carrying old tales of Numenor and the West, until even his words become part of the wind. Service over self, patience over haste, and no herald to cry his name. In Rivendell, the light changes. It falls through leaves and carved stone like water, clear and cool, and the air is full of the scent of pine and distant rain. Aragorn walks those echoing halls not as a conqueror returned, but as a son and a pupil, listening more than he speaks, learning healing as well as battle, standing at Elrond's side while others debate great matters, yet offering his counsel only when asked. There too he is half unseen, a man in grey among lords of brighter raiment. Upon the walls of Helm's Deep, the wind is harsher. It tastes of stone dust and storm, and the torches flare and gutter as the host of the enemy gathers in the vale below. The enemy is upon us, men whisper, yet Aragorn moves along the battlements with quiet words and steady hands, lifting fallen spirits, promising that dawn will come, though he does not know if he will live to see it. He chooses courage without certainty and hope without any promise of reward, while far away a great eye searches for armies and for rings, and does not stoop to notice one man walking the walls in the rain. Beneath the mountain, the world falls silent. The air is close and cold, and every footstep upon the stone paths of the dead seems to echo into an endless depth. No banners stir here, no trumpets sound, only the soft scrape of boots, the faint chink of harness, and the whisper of voices that are no longer wholly of this world. Aragorn walks at the head, a single lantern of will in the vast darkness, speaking words of ancient oath and release, his authority not shouted but simply borne, like a burden accepted long ago. Around him, unseen by Sauron's proud calculations, the forgotten rise to answer a promise, and yet not all courage had perished. In each of these places he chose the lower road, to watch instead of to boast, to heal instead of to grasp, to wait instead of to seize. The great eye in the dark tower, fixed upon thrones and on the ring, could not understand such choices, and so they passed before it, like dreams at the edge of sleep, faint and unmeasured, yet gathering power. So let these images soften now as if seen through rain on glass. The inn's fire becomes a single ember, the northern camp a fading warmth upon the skin, the halls of Rivendell a distant music half remembered. The thunder at Helm's Deep grows quiet. The stone ways beneath the mountain recede into shadow, until all that remains is the sense of a tall, weary figure moving through them all, serving without fanfare, loving without demand, and walking always a little apart. As you drift at the edge of sleep, you need not hold every name or place, every battle or oath. It is enough to feel the shape of his journey, the way his strength lay not in the ring he refused, but in the paths he chose when no one watched. For even as Sauron's shadow thinned and frayed, there was one more road yet before Aragorn. One last choice that the Dark Lord had never reckoned with, waiting beyond the circles of fire and stone, where the fate of many would hinge upon a single, quiet step, from the eye to the stars, placing the Dark Lord in perspective. And beyond that last quiet step, beyond the circles of fire and stone, there was a sky that neither Sauron nor his servants could command. For all his watchfulness, for all the burning fury of the eye that searched the plains and mountains, his reign was only one dark page in a book far older than his malice, and far wider than his will could ever reach. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now it is time to rest. So settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin again. Not in the red glare above the black land, but under the quiet stars that shone alike on Mordor and on Gondor, on the white city and on the ashen plain, heedless of the battle far below. In the long years before Sauron rose from the ruin of Númenor, those same stars had watched the first ships of the Edain cross the seas, and they had looked down upon the joy of Elendil when he raised the high towers of the west. In the ages after his fall, they would still burn, cold and clear, above empty fortresses and silent slag heaps, bearing no mark of his pride or his despair. Seasons turned over the Efelduth and the Pelennor alike, winter frost touching black stone and white tower with the same pale hand, and spring returning with slow, patient green, even to fields once trampled by a host of iron-shod feet. When the enemy is upon us, it is easy to believe that the darkness is all there is, that the fire of one great will fills the world. Yet not all courage had perished. Even at the height of Sauron's power, when his eye swept restlessly from the Morannon to the Anduin, he did not see two hobbits sharing a crust of bread in the wastes, or a ranger of the north keeping silent watch on a nameless hill, or a healer in the houses of healing binding a broken arm by lamplight while the city shook with war. Such things were too small for him, and so they were beyond his grasp. He could weigh the might of armies, and he could reckon the fear in the hearts of kings. But he could not measure the quiet strength that leads a man to refuse the ring when it lies within his hand, or to march towards certain death at the Black Gate, so that others might have a chance to live. Aragorn was one of these, but he was not alone. Around him moved many whose names would never be set in high songs, and yet in the long memory of Middle-earth, it is their steady light that endures when the red glare of the eye has vanished like smoke. So, as you rest, consider this. What shadow has loomed over your own day? And how small might it seem when set beneath the slow turning of the stars and the long story of your life, which no single fear or failure can command? For there is more to tell of Aragorn, and of those who walked beside him in that wider tale. And in the next part of our legend we will follow him a little further along that road, beyond Sauron's sight, letting the tale fade. A gentle descent from epic to rest. And now, as that wider road stretches on beyond Sauron's sight, our own path begins to turn gently homeward. The high towers of Minas Tirith, the Black Gate, the fire-lit plains of Gorgoroth, all these may remain in your imagination if you wish, but they stand far away and long ago, in a tale whose battles are finished, whose great host has passed like smoke on the wind. Night has already deepened, and the day was long and tiring. And now it is time to rest. Hello, friends. The shadows and the enemy we have spoken of belong to another age, and here in your small, safe room there is only quiet and breath and the slow beating of your own steadfast heart, like a soft drum that keeps gentle time while the world outside grows distant. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin to fade as a fire on the hearth sinks from bright flame to quiet embers. We have walked through a legend of a dark lord who saw much but understood little, whose burning eye searched the lands of Middle-earth and yet passed over the simple strength that would undo him. And we have followed, for a little while, a wandering man, a ranger in weather-stained cloak, whose quiet choices lay always just beyond the reach of that dark understanding. Sauron's mind was fixed upon power, upon the ring, upon the will to master and to bend. He had known proud kings of Numenor and broken them, so he looked for the same hunger in every heart, and in Aragorn he expected only another hand reaching upward for a crown of dominion. Yet not all courage had perished. In the houses of healing, in the paths beneath the haunted mountains, in his refusal of the ring, Aragorn's strength showed itself as mercy, as patience, as the strange and steady choice to serve before he ruled. How could one who valued only fear and death perceive such a light? And now, as your own thoughts grow slower, it is not needful to hold tightly to every name, every place, every turn of the tale. Let them pass if they wish, as leaves upon a quiet stream, for the heart of the story has already settled where it needs to, in that deep place where hope listens, even when the mind drifts and forgets. What remains is simple, that true strength often walks unarmed, that real kingship stoops to lift the fallen, that the greatest victory may be the refusal to grasp at power at all. So let the rhythm of these words grow softer and the pauses longer, as if the last pages of a book were being turned in a warm, lamplit room, and the voice of the storyteller were falling to a whisper. For this legend, like all gentle things, will wait for you, and in the next part we will return to Aragorn's road, but for now it is time to rest. Your place in the tale. Quiet reflections and gentle questions. So settle in comfortably and let the hush grow deeper around you, as if the very walls and windows were drawing a soft cloak against the night. If you are still awake, and if your thoughts are still moving gently beneath the surface of sleep, you might let them wander for a moment along Aragorn's long road. Among all the steps he took, which moment calls most quietly to you? Is it the time upon Amon Hen, when he turned from the ring and from his own fear of failure, and chose instead to follow the scattered fellowship into danger and uncertainty? Is it the time in Minas Tirith, when he walked the houses of healing with Athelas in his hands, and the sick stirred at his touch, and hope returned to halls that had almost prepared themselves for death? Perhaps your heart rests instead upon the march to the Black Gate, when a small and weary host of the West went out beneath a darkened sky, not to win a battle, but to draw the gaze of the enemy away from a single hidden path. Or perhaps it is some quieter act along the road that lingers with you, a word of comfort to the hobbits beside a small fire, a choice to spare a fallen foe, a night of watchful patience when fear might easily have ruled. Hello, friends. If you wish, you may also turn, very slowly, to a different question. Among all these choices, which do you think would have most baffled Sauron? And why? Would it be Aragorn's refusal of the ring, when all Sauron's thought was fixed upon the belief that any strong will must crave such power? Would it be the healing in Minas Tirith, an authority that flowed not from domination, but from mercy and service? Or was it the march to the Black Gate itself, when Aragorn used Sauron's own certainty against him, feigning a last reckless grasp at power, while in truth he staked everything upon the courage of two small travellers whom Sauron scarcely counted. You need not answer now. Let the question drift beside you, like a leaf upon a slow, dark stream. For in your own life also, there are choices that those who love only power may never truly see. A word of kindness spoken when no reward is offered, a restraint held when anger burns like fire in the blood. A quiet act of courage taken when no host is watching and no song will ever be sung. Yet not all courage had perished. Such hidden deeds shape the world in ways that no dark eye can wholly foresee. If, on some other night, you wish to return to this tale or to walk beside other figures whom Sauron misread and underestimated, you will be welcome. I will tell you a kind legend again when next you seek rest, and together we will look upon the places where darkness believed itself strong and where a different strength endured in silence. For now there is no need to move, no need to speak, no need to choose. Let these questions pass by you, unhurried and light, and if sleep is drawing near, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin again only when you are ready, in another quiet hour of the night. Closing the book, a soft farewell at the end of all things. And so, as those questions drift away like mist over the quiet fields of Gondor, we come at last to the gentle end of this road. We have walked beside Strider in the wild, and stood with Elisar beneath the white tree, and we have dared for a little time to look through the eye of Sauron, and see how little it understood of the heart that opposed it. In the long watches of the night, when the enemy seemed strongest and the darkness most sure of its own victory, Sauron saw only power and the will to dominate, and the ring that was the measure of all desire to him. Yet not all courage had perished. Aragorn moved beyond his sight not by stealth of body alone, but by choices that Sauron could not imagine. By mercy where he expected cruelty, by humility where he expected pride, by a steadfast refusal of the ring that shattered every dark calculation. Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring, and now it is time to rest. Thank you for walking this path with me, for lending your quiet attention to the tale of a single man whom a dark lord could not truly see. Your time is a gift, especially at this late hour, when the world grows still and the last embers of the day's fire are fading into soft ash. As we have seen, Aragorn's long years as a ranger, his hidden lineage from Elendil, his secret service in Gondor and Rohan, all unfolded far from the measures Sauron trusted. When the heir of Isildur looked into the Palantir and revealed himself, Sauron misread that courage as the first step toward claiming the ring, never understanding that this man would march to the Black Gate as a shield for others, not as a tyrant seeking a throne. In the houses of healing, in the paths of the dead, in every quiet act of pity and resolve, Aragorn stood in a place Sauron could not reach. If this journey has brought you a measure of calm or stirred a gentle spark of wonder at the hidden strengths of Middle-earth, you are always welcome to return. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin again on another night, with other tales of overlooked souls and silent victories, where hope moves softly beneath the shadow and is not overcome. If you wish, when morning comes and you feel ready, you may share in the comments which moment most convinced you that Sauron never truly understood Aragorn, or perhaps suggest another heart, another figure in the long history of Arda, for a future deep dive into the lore. Which hidden king or wandering captain or quiet healer would you like to see beneath the surface of the great tales? For now, let all such thoughts grow distant and light. Above a renewed Gondor, the high airs are clear, and the stars shine like white flowers over the silver river, and the white city sleeps in peace, its king at rest. The enemy is upon us no longer. There is only the slow breathing of the earth, the hush after battle, the soft promise of healing. Let the last words fade, let the silence deepen, and let sleep take you, gently and without fear, until the first pale light of another day.